Why did the air feel heavier here? Sarah Martinez stepped out of the rental car, the crunch of gravel beneath her boots cutting through the hush of the Montana morning. Sunlight reached across the tree line in long, cold fingers, spilling over. Weathered buildings that leaned like they'd been here since the town's first breath. The scent hit her immediately, oil and dust with a faint, clean edge of pine drifting down from the ridgeline. She pulled her jacket tighter, not because she was cold. The knot in her stomach had been there for 8 months, coiled tight, a thing she'd stopped trying to untangle. It rode with her now, silent but insistent. The lot told its own story before she'd taken 10 steps. Rusted pickup trucks with gun racks stood beside ATVs plastered with dried mud, paint sun-faded to dull gray. Only one vehicle seemed out of place, a spotless black SUV. She guessed another out-of-stater. Her hand shook as she reached for her purse. The tremor had started after Kandahar. It never really left. She pressed her palms against her jeans until the motion stopped, then headed for the range office. The door's hinges groaned when she pushed it open. Inside, the air was close, thick with decades of gun oil and dust. The walls were cluttered with old photographs, men in camouflage grinning beside deer carcasses, women in blaze orange holding shotguns half their size. Glass-eyed trophies stared down from every wall, their permanent expressions unreadable. Man sat behind the counter, hunched over a sheet of paperwork. His beard was iron gray, his face carved with deep lines. His voice came without a glance upward. "Are you the Martinez woman?" The gravel in his tone said smoker, maybe whiskey. "Yes, sir," she answered. "Sarah Martinez. I'm here for the firearm safety course." Bill Thompson looked up. His eyes, a pale, weathered blue, studied her without hurry. Sarah could almost hear the assessment forming in his head. Petite frame, barely pushing late 20s, jacket that had never seen real weather. Boots still with store creases. Her hands had the kind of skin that didn't split in winter. She knew exactly what he saw. Someone playing dress-up. Alaska, huh? He flicked his eyes to her application. Wildlife research. Let me guess. Saw a documentary. Decided to commune with nature? She forced a polite smile. Something like that. The door opened behind her, letting in a swirl of air and the clamor of arriving students. Janet, bubbly and blonde, smelling faintly of perfume. An accountant named Mark, already fussing with his glasses. 2 college kids, Tyler and Madison, more interested in selfies than safety. Bill arranged them into a semicircle of folding chairs. Sarah slipped to the back, habit guiding her to a spot where her back touched the wall, and the exits were in clear view. The lecture began. The 4 fundamental rules, spoken in a voice that made them sound more like a grocery list than the difference between life and death. Sarah mouthed the words silently. Treat every firearm as loaded. Never point at anything you're not willing to destroy. Finger off the trigger. Know your target and what's beyond it. It had been years since she'd first learned them, but the cadence still rolled off her lips the same way it had in another life. The instructors then hadn't worn flannel. They'd worn uniforms and eyes that had seen the aftermath when these rules were ignored. Her mind drifted. Not far, just enough to see snow-covered ridges in Alaska. The job posting had been brief. Remote wildlife monitoring, radio check-ins. Months alone, exactly what she wanted. Exactly what she thought might quiet the noise in her head. Bill's voice cut in again. Be sure of your target and what's beyond it. After the classroom came the range. The air outside had warmed slightly, but the peaks in the distance still wore caps of snow. The shooting lanes stood in a neat row, targets stretched out at measured distances. The concrete under her boots was cool, smooth. Bill passed out rifles one by one. Janet with a light, 22. Mark with a solid 243. The college kids with rifles that looked factory clean. When he reached her, something shifted in his expression. From the back of the rack, he dragged out a battered .308. The woodstock was split, bound with electrical tape. The barrel had a visible bend. The scope mounted at an angle that made her fingers itch. "This one's perfect for you, sweetheart." His voice was thick with condescension. "She's got character." Sarah took the rifle without protest, though her hands moved over it in a way she didn't mean to, fingers flicking the safety, testing the bolt, weighing the trigger pull. She felt the familiar click of steel against her palm, and for the first time that morning, her hands were steady. The others began shooting. The sharp cracks rang across the valley, some echoing back from the tree line. Bill barked corrections. "You're jerking it, Janet." "Stop closing your eyes, Mark." "You're hitting the berm, Tyler." Sarah waited. Lane 5 was hers. She loaded the magazine with slow, measured movements, each cartridge sliding into place with a soft click. Bill finally turned to her, voice carrying. "All right, city girl, let's see what you can do with that piece of junk." The others stopped to watch. Bill stood behind her, binoculars ready, already rehearsing his mocking remarks. Sarah felt the stock settle into her shoulder, her body angled, feet finding their place like they always had. The cracked optic brought the target at 100 yards into view, distorted, skewed, but her breathing fell into the pattern that had once been second nature. She could almost hear another voice in her ear. "Wind's calm, range confirmed, you're clear to engage." And then the crosshairs floated, a skewed oval instead of a perfect circle because of the bent barrel and crooked scope. But her mind adjusted automatically, the calculations sliding into place without conscious thought. Wind barely kissing the grass. Elevation negligible, barrel pull right, compensate left. Her breath eased out until it was just her heartbeat and the slow tension of the trigger. The rifle cracked. The sound ripped across the range, bouncing off the distant mountain wall. The recoil pushed into her shoulder, familiar, grounding. She worked the bolt before the echo faded. The second round chambering with a precise metallic clink. Janet's voice cut in, soft at first. "Oh my God." Bill brought the binoculars up, expecting a miss, maybe a lucky hit somewhere near the paper. Instead, center, dead center, the tiny X-ring was gone, obliterated into ragged white. His mouth went dry. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The second shot landed before he lowered the glass. It didn't. Just hit close. It disappeared into the same hole. The paper tore inwards, edges curling. Bill adjusted the focus, eyes narrowing. A third shot. Same result. The range fell quiet except for the crisp mechanics of her firing. Breathe. Press, cycle, breathe. By the fifth shot, there was no bullseye left. Just a dark, torn wound in the paper. Tyler's rifle dangled from his hands. Madison stood with her mouth open. Mark was cleaning his glasses like maybe the blur was on his lenses. Not reality. Janet didn't speak again. Her chatter cut off like a radio losing signal. Sarah kept shooting, 6th, 7th, 8th. It wasn't just precision. It was control. She wasn't fighting the rifle's flaws. She was using them, folding them into her calculation like a tailor accounting for a crooked seam. Bill's stomach tightened. Her breathing was textbook. The trigger press was straight back, smooth, no jerk, no hitch. The follow-through. She held it every single time. A full second after the shot, eyes still locked on the target. That wasn't hobby shooting. That wasn't even competitive shooting. That was something else. She fired the 10th shot, then lowered the rifle. Her gaze stayed on the target. But Bill knew she wasn't looking at it. Her eyes had that distant, fractured focus, the same one he'd seen in combat vets who were halfway in the present and halfway somewhere they'd never fully left. "Jesus Christ," Tyler whispered. "How did you do that?" Her head turned slightly, as if she'd only just remembered she wasn't alone. She glanced down at the battered rifle, then back at the ruined target. "My father taught me to hunt when I was young," she said, her tone flat, rehearsed. "Guess it's like riding a bike." Bill didn't hear the words. He was watching her hands. Smooth, practiced unloading, safety on, cartridges in a neat row. Everything about the movement said repetition. Thousands of repetitions. Not deer hunting in the Rockies, killing. Somewhere far from here. The tremor in his gut sharpened. "All right," he called, voice tight. "Take 5, everyone. Get some water. We'll come back to it." The students drifted toward the picnic tables. Chattering in hushed bursts, Sarah stayed behind, the rifle resting on the bench. She pulled a cleaning kit from her bag. Not the cheap plastic kind every outdoor store sold, but a military-grade set. Even the way she laid out the tools was methodical, bordering on ritual. Bill moved closer. "Where'd you say you learned to shoot like that?" She didn't look up. "Like I said, my father. Elk hunting? Every fall in Colorado, he used a 270. Said it was flat shooting enough for long-range work, but didn't kick like a mule." Bill caught the phrasing. Long-range work, not long shots. It was the kind of slip soldiers made when they're civilian. Mass thinned. He nodded, as if satisfied, but his mind was already turning. That grouping, with that rifle? Unnatural, unlikely, and for someone claiming wildlife research, her kit and posture were wrong. She didn't notice him walk away toward the office. Inside, he dug his phone out of his pocket. His contact list hadn't changed much over the years, and one name still stood out. Jake Morrison, Vietnam brother, now a detective with the county sheriff's office. The line clicked. "Jake, it's Bill." "Well, hell, Bill. Haven't heard from you in. I need a favor, background check. Name's Sarah Martinez, late 20s. Says she's from Colorado. Job lined up. In Alaska, something's not right." Jake's voice tightened. "What kind of not right?" Bill looked back out through the office window. Sarah was standing with Madison now, adjusting the younger woman's grip, her voice calm, her stance unyielding. She corrected posture like an instructor, gentle, precise, but with authority no weekend course could teach. The kind that puts 10 shots through the same hole at 100 yards with a rifle that's been busted since the Clinton administration. Bill said, "I'll make some calls. Give me 20 minutes." Bill hung up and stared at the form Sarah had filled out that morning. Every line was neat, exact. Too exact. No smudges. No crossings out, like she'd been filling out paperwork where mistakes weren't allowed. Her background check was clean, too clean, and the emergency contact number? Straight to a voicemail with a generic recording. He looked back out again. Sarah was now alone. Breaking down the rifle, her hands steady, her eyes always scanning the tree line, the other firing lanes, the open field beyond the targets, not jumpy. Just aware, constantly aware, the kind of awareness you didn't get from hiking in the backcountry, the kind of awareness you never lost after war. The phone buzzed against the desk, making the stack of old range receipts shiver. Bill snatched it up. "Yeah?" Jake's voice was low, stripped of its earlier casualness. "Bill, where exactly is this woman right now?" Bill's eyes shifted. To the window, Sarah was 50 yards away, leaning slightly over Tyler's shoulder, guiding the young man's breathing like she'd been doing it her whole life, teaching college kids how to shoot. Why? Because, officially, Sarah Martinez only exists for the last 6 months. Jake said, before that nothing. No credit history, no job records, no school transcripts. It's like she stepped out of a fog last winter. Bill's fingers tightened around the phone. And unofficially? I called in a favor with an old bureau buddy. They ran the fingerprints from her concealed carry application. Got a hit in the military database. Jake paused just long enough to make Bill's stomach nod. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, sniper qualified. 3 tours in Afghanistan between 2019 and 2023. The words hung there. Bill felt the air shift, like the mountains outside had leaned closer. What happened to her? Medical discharge 8 months ago. Severe PTSD after an incident in Kandahar. Her spotter was killed by an IED. Bill leaned his forearm on the desk, eyes still on the woman outside. She was laughing now at something Madison had said, the sound carrying lightly across the range, but her head kept moving, just slightly. Cataloging, exit points, sight lines, threat vectors. Jake's voice dropped further. She was supposed to report to a VA facility in Colorado for treatment. She never showed. Army's been looking for her since, quietly. Bill didn't move. Anything in the file about temperament? He asked. Her service records. Clean, exemplary, actually. Multiple commendations. Not one disciplinary note, but... Jake hesitated, then let it land. 47 confirmed kills, Bill. And that's just what they put on paper. Bill's pulse thudded in his ears. 47. He'd known men in Vietnam who never got close to half that. She's a professional. Killer, Jake said. And she's been off the grid for 8 months. Now she's at your range with a rifle in her hands. Bill stared through the window, watching Sarah's profile in the sunlight. From here, she looked ordinary, like she could be a teacher, a neighbor, someone's daughter. But the longer he looked, the less ordinary she became. That coiled readiness didn't belong to a civilian. I'll handle it, Bill said quietly. Be careful. PTSD and that level of training? It can go bad fast. I know what it looks like, Jake. Bill hung up. For a long moment, he didn't move. He'd seen this before. Soldiers who came home but never really made it back. Some drowned the noise in liquor, some in silence. Some didn't last long enough to find out which one they'd choose. The door creaked when he pushed it open. The air outside cooler than he remembered. The range session was winding down. Madison was handing her rifle back. Tyler rubbing his shoulder from a day's worth of recoil. Janet had started packing her gear, still sneaking glances toward Sarah. Bill lingered near the benches, pretending to check the ammo inventory while his eyes tracked her. She was disassembling. The broken rifle, each movement deliberate. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble. She didn't look around like someone hiding, but she didn't let her guard drop either. When the last shots of the day cracked and faded, Bill called it, "That's it, folks. Good work today. Let's pack up." The group filtered toward the parking lot. Janet pressed a slip of paper with her number into Sarah's hand, saying something about coffee in town. Tyler and Madison asked a flurry of questions about hunting in Alaska. Mark gave her a silent nod of respect. One by one, engines turned over. Tires crunched on gravel, and the voices thinned out into nothing. Bill was still there when Sarah turned back from the empty lane. She'd volunteered to help close the range, setting the last of the rifles in their racks, securing the ammo shed. She moved through the tasks without complaint. If she noticed the way his eyes followed her, she didn't show it. The sun was lowering behind the ridgeline now, its light turning everything gold and sharp. A hawk wheeled overhead, its call cutting. Across the stillness, Bill stepped forward. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying in the empty space. "We need to talk." She paused, the broken rifle in her hands. For the smallest moment, something shifted in her face. Not fear, not surprise, but recognition. Bill saw it. He'd been waiting for it. "I know who you are. Staff Sergeant Chun." The rifle slipped from her hands and hit the concrete with a hollow clatter. She didn't bend to pick it up. Her shoulders sagged like a weight had landed there, one she'd been bracing against for months. Her voice was almost a whisper. "How long have you known?" Bill closed the distance between them slowly, palms visible. "Since about an hour after you put that first shot downrange." She looked at him then, and he saw it. Not the soldier, not the quiet civilian mask she'd been wearing all day, but something in between. The last streaks of sun caught in her hair, but her eyes were shadowed, unreadable. She didn't reach for the rifle. She didn't even move. Bill took another step forward, slow and steady, like approaching a skittish animal. 47 confirmed kills, he said, his tone neither accusation nor praise. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Medal of Valor for actions in Kandahar. You want to tell me why a decorated Army Ranger is hiding out in Montana under a fake name? Her laugh came sharp and hollow. Decorated. She repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. You know what they don't put on commendations, Bill? They don't put the faces. They don't tell you that every person you kill takes something from you, piece by piece, until you can't remember what you looked like before. She turned away from him, her boots scraping softly against the concrete. The mountains stretched out before them, vast and indifferent. You want to know why I'm here? She asked without looking back. Because I can't sleep in cities anymore. Every car backfire sounds like an IED. Every rooftop looks like a sniper's nest. I see Marcus, my spotter, in every crowd, and then I remember he's dead. Because I didn't protect him. Bill stayed quiet, letting the silence hold. She swallowed hard, voice dropping lower. Last mission, Kandahar. We had overwatch for a convoy. Intel said the route was clear. It wasn't. They hit the lead vehicle with an IED. While I was looking for the trigger man, a second device went off, right under Marcus. Her eyes were wet now, though her voice stayed steady. He was 23, had a fiancée he used to show me. Pictures, church, dress, the whole thing, and he died because I missed it. I missed the signs. Disturbed earth, fresh tire tracks. All the things my training should have caught. Bill opened his mouth, but she cut him off. Don't say I didn't fail him. Don't say it's war. I know what war is. I know what chaos looks like. And I know when the failure is mine. He could hear it, that dangerous mix of guilt and precision. The same tone he'd heard from men who'd come back from Vietnam with perfect clarity about one moment they couldn't undo. Her jaw tightened. After Marcus, something broke. A week later, we got a high-value target bomb maker, responsible for dozens of IEDs. I had him in my scope, and I waited, watched him for an hour, memorized his face. When I finally pulled the trigger, I felt nothing. She rubbed a hand hard across her eyes, leaving streaks in the dust. That's when I knew I wasn't a soldier anymore, just a machine. Bill let the weight of her words settle. The breeze carried the scent of pine and dust. Between them, the VA tried. She went on. Therapy, meds, groups. But how do you sit in a room and say you're not haunted by the people you killed, but by the fact you don't feel anything anymore when you killed them? How do you say you're more afraid of living than dying? So you ran, Bill said quietly. I ran, changed my name. Alaska seemed far enough. Maybe there I could finally be alone. No backfires, no rooftops. He studied her profile, the stillness in it, like she'd braced herself for the worst. He'd seen that look before in soldiers who'd convinced themselves there was no road back. What happens when someone figures out who you are? He asked. When the army comes knocking? I don't know, she said, her voice stripped bare. I try not to think about it. The wind shifted. Somewhere high up, a hawk called again. Bill took a long breath. I'm not going to turn you in. Her head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing in disbelief. But I'm not going to let you keep running, either. Confusion flickered across her face. He stepped closer until they stood side by side, both facing the fading horizon. You think the only way to live with what you've done is to bury it. Pretend it never happened. But those skills, that training, they don't have to be a curse. I don't understand, she said, though the edge in her voice had softened. Our local search and rescue team needs people. Bill said, every year we lose hikers, hunters, climbers up in those mountains. Last winter, a family of 4 froze to death before we could reach them. If we'd had someone with your skills, your ability to read terrain, weather, track, they might still be alive. She shook her head. You don't get it. I'm not a hero, Bill. I'm a killer who doesn't feel remorse anymore. How does that qualify me to save anyone? He met her gaze. Because you spent 3 years taking lives for your country. Maybe it's time to spend some time saving them. For Marcus, for yourself. She looked away, eyes tracing the ridgeline. He let the silence breathe. The nightmares. "Won't stop," she said after a while. "No," Bill agreed. "But maybe they'll hurt less if you give them a reason to." Her gaze drifted back toward the bench where the broken rifle lay, then to the mangled target at the far lane. "You really think I could make a difference?" "I think Marcus would want you to try," Bill said. The wind stirred again, cool and clean, carrying the faint promise of snow from the high peaks. She closed her eyes, letting it touch her face. And for the first time in months, she didn't hear anything else. No explosions, no voices, no distant calls for help she couldn't give. When she opened her eyes, something had shifted. Not peace, but the possibility of it. "When do we start?" she asked. The next morning, the mountains looked sharper. The air had that crystalline bite that came before snow. Though the valley was still warm enough for the pine needles to hold their dew, Sarah was already at the range when Bill arrived. She was sitting on the tailgate of her rental car, drinking coffee from a tin mug that looked like it had seen 100 campfires. Her jacket was zipped high, hair pulled back, eyes tracking the tree line as if she'd been awake for hours. "You're early," Bill said. "I don't sleep much," she replied. He set down his range bag. "Good, because we're not going to the range today. There's someone I want you to meet." The drive took them north, the road climbing into narrow switchbacks where frost still lingered in the shadows. They passed scattered cabins, smoke rising from chimneys, and stretches of open meadow where the grass lay flattened in frozen ripples. At a gravel turnout, a white truck waited. A woman in her 50s stood beside it, arms crossed against the chill. She wore a heavy fleece, canvas pants, and the kind of boots that looked as if they'd been resoled a dozen times. "Sarah, this is Lisa Harper," Bill said. "She's been running the county search and rescue team longer than anyone can remember." Lisa's eyes swept over Sarah in a single quick pass. "Bill says you've got skills. We'll see." She handed Sarah a map and a handheld radio. "We've got a missing hunter. Left camp 2 nights ago. Hasn't come back. His truck's still at the trailhead." Sarah unfolded the map, scanning it with an intensity that made Lisa's gaze sharpen. "Last known point?" she asked. Lisa pointed to a marked spot along the edge of a forested ridge. "Search teams have been sweeping the lower trails. No luck so far. You think you can do better?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She crouched, spreading the map across her knee, tracing the contour lines with one finger. If he's injured and couldn't make it back down, he'd have tried to get higher ground for cell service. This ridge here, she tapped a narrow line of elevation, has visibility over most of the valley. But the access trails washed out on this side. You'd have to know the old game paths to get there. Bill saw Lisa's eyebrows lift. Just slightly. They hiked in under a cold sun. The forest swallowed sound quickly, the kind of stillness that made every snap of a twig feel louder than it should. Sarah moved easily, as if the slope didn't pull at her legs. She kept glancing at the ground, pausing now and then to study the way moss had been crushed, or where a stone had turned just enough to show damp soil beneath. Lisa tried to keep pace, but Sarah wasn't following the marked trail anymore. She was moving diagonally, toward a shallow ravine where the frost still clung in shadow. "Boot. Print," Sarah said quietly, pointing. Lisa stepped closer, squinting. The print was faint, just a partial heel in the damp earth. "How did you?" "The edge is fresh." Sarah cut in. "Frost melted under the weight. Hasn't refrozen yet. He came through after sunrise." They followed the tracks, sometimes obvious, sometimes only a hint. At one point, Sarah stopped and tilted her head. "You hear that?" she asked. Lisa shook her head. Sarah moved forward without explanation. 10 yards later, a voice floated faintly on the air. Hoarse, calling for help. The hunter was sitting against a rock face, his right ankle swollen and purplish. He looked up at them with glassy relief. I thought I was done for." Lisa dropped to one knee, checking him over. Sarah was already on the radio, giving their coordinates in a clipped, calm voice that reminded Bill of calling in medevac positions. By the time the rescue truck reached them, the light had begun to fade. The hunter was loaded onto a stretcher, talking weakly about slipping on wet stone. Lisa stayed beside him while the EMTs worked. Bill stood back, watching Sarah. She was scanning again, eyes sweeping the ridgeline, the forest, the path they'd come down. Not restless, just never still inside her own head. Lisa walked over. Once the truck pulled away, "You found him faster than we would have with the dogs," she said. "How?" Sarah shrugged. "You see enough terrain. You know what doesn't fit." "That," Lisa said, "isn't something you teach in a weekend course." They drove back down in silence. The valley below was washed in the last orange light of day, shadows stretching long and deep. Halfway back, Lisa spoke again. "You want to work with us? It's volunteer. Training sessions twice a month, call-outs any hour, any weather. Sometimes we find them alive, sometimes we don't." Sarah looked out the passenger window. "I've worked in worse conditions." Lisa didn't push for more. She just nodded once. When they reached the turnout where they met, Lisa got out, slamming the truck door behind her. "Bill," she said over the roof, "if you're vouching for her, I'll take her. But you better be sure about who you're bringing in." Bill met her stare. "I'm sure." Lisa gave Sarah a look that was part warning, part curiosity. "See you next week." The drive back to the range was quiet. The mountains loomed dark now, their peaks cutting hard shapes against the twilight. "You didn't have to do that." Sarah said finally. "Do what?" "Pull me into your rescue team." Bill kept his eyes on the road. "You needed somewhere to put all that skill. Better here than in your head." She didn't answer, but her gaze stayed fixed on the ridgeline. For a long time, as if committing its shape to memory. The first training session came 3 days later, on a morning so cold the air felt like it would shatter if you breathed too hard. Frost crusted the range's gravel lot, each stone edged in white. The peaks beyond were buried in clouds, and the wind down from them smelled like snow. Sarah arrived early, again. She stood by her rental with her pack slung over one shoulder, watching the horizon. When Lisa's truck pulled in, followed by 2 others, she didn't wave, didn't step forward. She just waited until they were close enough to hear. The team was a mix. 2 men in their 60s who looked like they'd been born in hiking boots, a woman in her 30s, with a sour patch sewn onto a jacket that had seen years of sun, and a younger guy barely out of high school, all restless energy and nervous grins. "This is Sarah," Lisa said without ceremony. "She's shadowing today. Let's see if she can keep up." They started with a mock search grid in the foothills. The grass crunched underfoot, still stiff from the overnight freeze. Each volunteer got a quadrant, radio check-ins every 15 minutes. Sarah's sector sloped up into thin pines, the kind that grew tall but sparse, letting the wind whistle through like an empty bottle. She moved in a steady, efficient pattern, eyes scanning. Ground, brush, tree line, then ground again. Her boots didn't trip on roots. Her hands never fumbled with the radio. She found the missing subject, a volunteer wrapped in a bright tarp, in under 20 minutes. But instead of radioing immediately, she crouched beside him, eyes sweeping the ridge above. "Everything okay?" the man asked, playing along with his role as a lost hiker. Sarah's gaze lingered on a shadow between 2 trees before she answered. "Yeah, just making sure there's nothing else here." Back at base, Lisa called the drill early. She found her subject fastest, she told the others, and without cutting corners. The younger guy, Ben, smirked. "Yeah." And she was acting like there were Taliban hiding in the trees. It was meant as a joke, but something in Sarah's eyes froze for half a second before smoothing over. They moved on to rope work, lowering a stretcher down a steep embankment. The others worked cautiously, talking through each knot, each carabiner. Sarah moved faster, Hands sure, motions clean, like the rope was an old language she'd spoken for years. Ben watched her. You said you worked in wildlife research, right? They teach you rigging in that. Sometimes you have to get samples from hard-to-reach places, she said without looking up. It was the kind of answer that was just enough, but no more. By midday, clouds had thickened. Lisa called for a final exercise. Map and compass navigation, no GPS allowed. The team split into pairs. Sarah ended up with Carl, one of the older men. They worked in silence, Sarah's pace steady, her compass needle swinging only when she wanted it to. At one point, Carl stopped to check his bearings and found her watching the sky instead. Something wrong? He asked. Just checking the wind, she said. But her eyes weren't on the wind. They were on a break in the clouds, the kind of gap a sniper might wait for. When they returned, Lisa gave a brief debriefing. You've got instincts, she told Sarah. The kind we need. Sarah only nodded. She didn't smile. That night, alone in her motel room, she dreamed again of Kandahar. She was on the rooftop, sun hammering her through the heat haze. The smell of burning trash and diesel, Marcus beside her, muttering about wanting a cold beer back home. She'd seen movement in the alley, a figure slipping behind a wall, and her whole body had tensed for the shot. Then the blast, heat, pressure, light, all at once. When she woke, her heart was racing, hands gripping the blanket like a rifle stock. She sat in the dark until her breathing slowed, then got up, stripped the bed, and remade it perfectly. The old habit calmed her more than any deep-breathing exercise ever had. The next week's training was night navigation. The air was colder, the frost sharper underfoot. Each member had a headlamp, but Sarah kept hers dimmed, eyes adjusting to the moonlight. She moved with the terrain instead of against it, cutting angles the others didn't see. When Ben tripped on a root, she was there instantly, catching his arm before he hit the ground. He stared at her for a second too long. How do you even see that in the dark? Listen to your feet, she said simply. Later, when they stopped to regroup, she drifted a few yards away, crouching low, scanning the ridge above. Lisa watched her, curiosity narrowing into something closer to caution. By the end of the month, Sarah's reputation was taking shape. The veterans on the team respected her quiet competence. The younger ones joked about her weird sixth sense, but didn't push too far. What none of them said aloud was the same question Lisa was beginning to turn over in her mind. How does a wildlife researcher move like someone who spent her life preparing for an ambush? The first real call-out came in the middle of a storm. Wind shook the motel windows, rattling the metal frame. When Sarah's phone buzzed, missing flashed on the screen above Lisa's name. 2 hikers overdue. Lisa's voice came fast over the static. Teenagers went up the North Trail before the weather turned. Last seen around noon. Meet at the trailhead. By the time Sarah pulled in, snow was already layering the gravel lot. The other SAR trucks were lined up, headlights cutting beams through the wind. Everyone was moving quickly. Harnesses clipped, radios checked, packs tightened. Lisa handed her a locator beacon. Pair up with Ben. You're sweeping Sector 4. Ben was pale under his hood, his grin gone for once. Sector 4's the ridgeline, he said under his breath. Steep drop, bad footing in this weather. They started to climb in silence, the snow turning to ice underfoot, wind pressing them sideways. Visibility was low, the trees blurred to gray shapes, the trail vanishing every few steps under drifts. Watch your step, Ben called over the wind. Trail's narrow here. Sarah didn't answer. Her head was tilted, listening. Somewhere under the roar of wind was another sound. Faint, intermittent, a voice. She raised a hand, and Ben stopped, confusion on his face. She pointed up slope. You sure? He asked. Radio says stay on the... She was already moving, boots biting into the ice in quick, sure steps. Ben scrambled after her, cursing when his foot slid on a patch of rock. The voice grew clearer, hoarse, panicked. Sarah followed it to a narrow ledge where one of the hikers was clinging to a dead tree, snow caked in his hair. The other boy was farther down, wedged between boulders, his leg twisted unnaturally. "We need to get him stable before we move him," Sarah said, crouching beside the first boy. Her voice was calm but edged with urgency. "Ben, rope team now." Ben fumbled with the coil. On his back, fingers stiff from the cold, Sarah took it without a word. The knot forming in her hands so quickly it looked rehearsed. When the wind gusted hard enough to shove them sideways, she shifted her weight instantly, anchoring both boys with her body until it passed. Her eyes kept scanning, above, below, behind. Even as she worked, by the time the rest of the team reached them, both boys were roped and ready to move. Lisa's eyes flicked from Sarah's knots to her stance on the ice, then back to her face. "You've done this before," Lisa said over the wind. "Enough to know what works," Sarah replied, already starting the slow, careful descent. The hike out was brutal. Sideways snow, footing that vanished without warning. Twice, Ben slipped badly enough to need catching, and both times Sarah moved faster than he could process, hauling him upright before the rope went taut. When they finally reached the trailhead, the boys were bundled into a waiting ambulance. Steam rose from their bodies in the heat. Ben leaned against his truck, panting. "You're not just a researcher," he said, not accusing, not quite asking. Sarah didn't meet his eyes. "It doesn't matter what I am. They're alive." Lisa approached, her expression unreadable in the storm's dim light. "Good work," she said simply, but her gaze lingered on Sarah longer than it had to. By the time Sarah got back to her motel, her clothes were stiff with ice, her hands raw from rope burn. She dropped her pack on the bed, sat down, and stared at the wall. The boys' faces were still vivid in her mind, the fear in their eyes, the weight of their frozen hands, and over it, uninvited, came Marcus's face on the rooftop before the blast. She closed her eyes, but the image sharpened instead of fading. The sound of wind over snow bled into the dry, hot wind of Kandahar. The smell of pine was gone, replaced with diesel and dust. When her phone buzzed again, she started hard enough that the chair legs scraped the floor. It was a text from Ben. "You move like someone who's been in worse places than this. What's your story?" She didn't reply. Instead, she turned the phone face down, lay back on the bed, and let the cold in her bones seep into the room. The storm didn't lift for 2 days. By the time the roads were clear, the county had 3 more callouts, one for a stranded truck, one for a lost snowmobiler, and one for a missing solo hiker whose tracks had vanished in the WHITEOU to dot. Was the hiker they were still looking for when the unmarked SUV showed up at the trailhead. Bill saw it first. Dark windows, federal plates. The kind of vehicle that didn't come out this far unless someone had business worth the gas. The 2 men who stepped out weren't wearing uniforms, but they didn't need to. Close-cropped hair, posture that spoke of weapons training, eyes that scanned everything. They approached Lisa first, flashing badges too quickly to read. She pointed them toward Bill without asking questions. Sarah was 20 yards away, strapping on her snowshoes. She didn't notice the SUV until she caught Bill's expression. Tight, careful, like a man keeping his own pulse in check. Then she saw the men. Her fingers froze on the strap. One of them turned, scanning the lot, and his eyes locked on her. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just started walking. Bill stepped into his path. "What's this about?" "Army business," the taller man said. "We're looking for a Sarah Chun." Sarah's breath clouded in front of her. The mountains loomed behind her, and for one wild second she imagined just turning and running into them, letting the snow swallow her. But before she could move, Lisa's radio crackled. "Possible visual on subject, Sector 6. Coordinates incoming." Lisa swore. "That's the hiker. We've got to move now." Bill looked from the agents to Sarah. Something passed in his eyes. A decision. "She's the fastest you've got," he told Lisa. "You want that hiker alive," she goes. The taller agent started to protest, but Lisa was already moving, and Sarah was right behind her. The climb was punishing. Steep switchbacks iced over, drifts up to their knees in places. The wind was sharp enough to cut skin. Halfway up, they found the hiker. She was curled in a shallow snow hollow, barely conscious, her lips blue, her hands clawed around the straps of her pack. "She's hypothermic," Sarah said, dropping to her knees. "We need to get her wrapped and moving now." Lisa started unpacking gear, but Sarah was already working, stripping off her own outer layer to wrap around the woman, tucking chemical warmers into her gloves, speaking to her in a low, steady voice. It was nearly dark when they reached the trailhead again. The hiker was bundled in the back of an ambulance, her breathing shallow but steady. Sarah stood in the snow, watching until the doors closed. Her body was shaking now, the cold finally catching her. The agents were waiting. "Staff Sergeant Chun," the taller one said. "We need to talk." Bill stepped forward, his jaw set. "She just pulled a woman out of the mountains alive. You can wait until she gets warm." The agent's eyes flicked to Sarah. "We've been looking for you. You left treatment before. Your discharge was complete. That's a problem." Sarah met his stare. "I'm not going back." "That's not your choice," he said. Lisa glanced between them. "What's going on here?" Bill answered before Sarah could. "What's going on is that she's saved more lives out here in the last month than most of us manage in a year. That ought to count for something." The shorter agent spoke up. "It does. But she's still Army property until her discharge is processed properly. We can make this easy, or we can make it hard." Sarah didn't flinch. "If you want to drag me back, fine. But you wait until morning. There's still weather coming in tonight, and someone else will get lost. And I'm the one who's going to find them." There was a long pause. The taller agent studied her face, not the surface, but deeper, like he was looking for the part of her that had once belonged to them. Finally, he nodded. Morning. They left in the SUV, taillights vanishing into the dark. The next call-out came just before dawn. A father and son hadn't returned from ice fishing. The storm had shifted overnight, turning the lake into a maze of white and shadow. Sarah went with Lisa and Ben. They found the pair huddled under a collapsed tent, their stove long out of fuel, their skin pale with cold. On the way back, hauling the boy's small body against her own to keep him warm, Sarah felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not relief, not joy, but the quiet certainty that the space Marcus used to fill wasn't just empty anymore. The agents were waiting at the trailhead again. The taller one stepped forward. "Ready?" Sarah handed the boy to the EMTs and looked back at the mountains. Snow still drifted across their peaks, but the sky above them was clearing, thin lights spilling into the valleys. "No," she said. "Not yet. You saw what happened today. These people need me here." The agent's jaw tightened. "You can't run forever." She almost smiled. "I'm not running. Not anymore." They didn't cuff her, didn't force her. They just got back in the SUV and left, the sound of the engine fading into the cold air. Bill came to stand beside her. "You know they'll be back." "I know," she said. "What then?" She watched the ambulance doors close, the father and son inside, their lives still intact. The wind lifted a swirl of snow around her boots. "Then I'll do the same thing I did today," she said. Bill nodded once, his breath clouding in the cold. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The mountains above them were silent, but in that silence, she felt the closest thing to peace she'd known since Kandahar. And for now, that was enough.